The following podcast is brought to you exclusively by the Rad Rob Radio Network.
Welcome to the Leadership Evolution Podcast, where we explore what happens after the build. I'm Luke Mickelson, founder, leader, and someone who's walked through the challenges of growing an organization, letting go, and learning how to lead in a completely new way. This podcast is for founders, executives, and leaders who are navigating growth, identity, and the tension between control and legacy. Because building something great is only the beginning. Learning how to evolve with it, that's the real work. Let's dive in. Welcome back, everybody, to the Leadership Evolution Podcast. I'm Luke Mickelson, your host. I think you know who I am, hopefully. You're listening to this podcast about leadership evolution. And I'll tell you what, this next guest, I'm so excited. You know, I read his bio, and I've sat here and talked with him a little bit. And we're common souls. I think we have the same wavelength of what we're dealing with and what how we can help leaders, founders, CEOs work through some of the challenges of leadership evolution. But let me talk about, obviously, the main man today, our guest. He's an entrepreneur, leadership thinker, and author of the forthcoming book, Hands Off, which explores one of the most overlooked challenges in leadership, the emotional side of founder succession. Through personal experience, Chip discovered that transitioning leadership isn't simply a matter of legal documents, financial planning, or operational strategy. No, it requires founders to confront questions of identity, trust, purpose, and legacy. Sounds familiar, right, guys? His perspective was shaped by an unexpected founder transition triggered by a stroke that thrust the next generation into leadership before anyone felt fully prepared. That experience revealed a powerful truth. Succession, listen to this, succession is emotional work disguised as strategic work. Isn't that brilliant? Today, Chip helps founders and leaders think differently about preparing organizations for the future, not just by developing systems, but by developing themselves. His work challenges leaders to move beyond being indispensable builders and become intentional legacy creators who build organizations capable of thriving long after they're gone. My guest, Chip Scholz. Scholz, right? Am I saying that right, Chip?
It's close enough. Yep.
Close enough.
Nice to see you.
Say it right for me.
Well, it's kind of like the footpad, Scholz,
Scholz, perfect. Man, it's so good to have you on. Thanks for joining me today.
Yeah. God, you're looking healthy. It must be midsummer.
Well, I am in Costa Rica right now, so I do have a little bit of the Costa Rican tan on me going on, but otherwise back home, I'd be white as a ghost.
Good.
Well, thanks for joining us on the podcast. Chip, tell us a little bit about it. Where you're at, where you're from, where you grow up.
Grew up in Chicago, got old enough to know better and left. Moved to Atlanta, then to Charlotte, then back to Atlanta, then down to Tampa, then out to LA for 13 years. And the sentence was finally up in LA, and we were able to move freely about the country. And we ended up in Charlotte. So we've been here for 27 years.
No, Charlotte's beautiful. Just beautiful.
Yeah. And we moved here. So 13 years ago, I got laid off in LA, and we decided to pick up and move stakes, and we moved to just outside of Charlotte. And that's where I started my own business and started the leadership journey.
Wow. What did you do before?
I was a lobbyist.
Oh,
Am
really?
I allowed to say that? I was a lobbyist.
Sure, why not? I don't care.
Yeah. So I was.
We won't love you or hate you either way.
I worked for a company called BFI, which was a trash company at the time, and all the companies that I worked for don't exist anymore, so I don't know what to say about that. But they were getting ready to sell the company. I didn't know that at the time, and they got rid of everybody who wasn't picking up trash, and I was one of them. And so I had a great opportunity, and I had a great opportunity to do something different.
So, I mean, you decided to consult on business.
Yeah, and it was interesting because I found a company called Resource Associates, and they had some materials, some leadership materials, some strategic planning materials, and all that kind of stuff. And so I bought into the company, and I said, yesterday I couldn't spell consultant, today I are one.
Yeah, kind of know the feeling.
And so I jumped into the great American game of being in business for yourself. The first 5 years were really difficult, and I had a lot of wins, but I had a lot of defeats as well, and I just kind of felt my way. I had more expenses than I did revenue, which is always fun. I got some rather bad advice to finance my company on credit cards, and so that wasn't good. And it was just up and down. You don't. So I moved 2,500 miles away from all of my contacts to get into a contact business.
That's difficult, brother.
It doesn't sound like a good plan. So I knew nobody. I didn't know what I was selling. I didn't know how to sell it. And I'd spent most of my career in sales. So, I was in sales or sales management before I got into lobbying. And so I was completely unprepared for starting my own business, other than I had a great sense of optimism, and I knew I was going to be successful. Yeah, okay. My wife took a little bit more convincing. Yeah. But she got here and she started her own business as well. And so, we went through it. 27 years later, we're still here, and I've had a hell of a career.
Oh, wow. Have you always been like entrepreneurial minded and business minded?
Yes, but I didn't know it.
Yeah.
So, one thing I've learned a lot about, and this kind of goes to our subject, is I've learned a lot in the last 27 years about family business versus publicly held companies, corporations. I only worked for big publicly held corporations before that. I started off selling beans and corn and ketchup for Del Monte, and that was before they were bought by RJR. And I worked for CF Air Freight, which was a part of Consolidated Freightways, again, another company that's ended up on the ash heap of history, and BFI, which ended up getting bought out and changed around. So there were three big corporations that I worked for, and I realized that I'm not a really good employee.
You mean you don't like making other people money? What's wrong with that, Chip?
Well, that's part of it, but I tend to not really like all the systemic parts of being in business and being, I don't like all the HR meetings and all the other stuff, and that was the tough part. And so, getting in my own business, when I got laid off, the two things that I knew is that I didn't want to work for anybody else, and I wanted to hang my own shingle. Because all the people that I admired hung their own shingles. And, you mentioned you were involved in nonprofits. I was on the board as a lobbyist. I was on the board of 26 different chambers of commerce. I've been chairman of 4 different chambers of commerce. I've been on the boards of probably close to 100 nonprofits over the years, everything from, some trade associations to United Way and that kind of thing, and the YMCA. So yeah, I've been through all that, and it taught me an awful lot. But one of the things I've had for the last 27 years is I've gotten involved with family businesses, and the one thing I love about privately held businesses is, first of all, they pay on time. So that's really important. They don't string you out for 160 days or something like that, like big companies do. And second of all, there's just such a different vibe about family-owned businesses. there's such a different culture in the family-owned businesses, and that's the blessing and the curse, isn't it?
Oh yeah.
The blessing is you got this great vibe. The curse is what happens when the founder or the current holder of the position ends up being 70, 80, 90. I have one client whose dad died 4 days after he left the office at 94 years old.
Man. Whew.
Yeah.
Jumping in with 2 feet and swimming, learning how to swim.
Yeah, so that's what I've really enjoyed is working with family businesses and watching how they've evolved.
Well, it seems like you believe founder transition sounds like one of the least understood leadership challenges. Would you say that's true?
Absolutely.
Let me ask you this. So why do you think so many founders prepare financially and operationally, but neglect the emotional side that you talk about? Do they not know?
Well, I'm not sure that they prepare financially or strategically.
Sure.
Yeah. I think realizing you're going to die is kind of an afterthought, and nobody wants to admit their own mortality.
Sure.
That's really why they don't deal with it emotionally. Is nobody wants to admit their own mortality. And it was. I was listening to a podcast the other day on assisted suicide, and they had this person who was a death doula. Now, I've never heard that job description before, but it's. You know what a doula is, right? The somebody who helps in the birthing process. Well, they have a death doula, and this death doula is helps people understand their mortality. And the thing is that I think in our culture and in a lot of cultures, we don't do a really good job of understanding our mortality. And I think if we understood our mortality a little bit better, we would have a better job of saying, maybe it's time to hang it up. But look, Luke, I don't know about you, but I never want to retire.
I don't have any plans to. Oh yeah.
yeah. And I don't think that's a bad thing, but I don't think I want to go at the intensity that I'm doing. Right. If it kind of slows down, that's okay. Yeah. But, I don't run business either, other than I don't run a business that hundreds of people depend on me.
Yeah.
If I'm in that position, I'd find another way to do it.
Well, and you, I can relate to this, but you had an experience physically, an experience that happened to you that changed a few things. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah. So in 2012, I had a stroke, and the doctors said it was a mild stroke. When you're inside of it, it certainly doesn't feel very mild. Sure. And it took me a while to come back. I was paralyzed on my right side. I wasn't able to speak, and for a speaker, it really is difficult to do what you do and you can't speak. It came back slowly but surely. It came back probably really well in 6 months. And the thing is that my cognition didn't come back as quickly, but it did. And there's a whole nother story about that. My wife bought me a lathe for Christmas, and I just got into wood turning, and that saved me cognitively. But it causes you to reset. Yeah. Because I weighed 110 pounds more than I do now. Oh. Before I had the stroke, and I was traveling like crazy, and like a typical week is I would start off in Newark, and on Tuesday I'd go to Atlanta, on Wednesday I'd go to Dallas, and on Thursday I'd go to LA, and then fly back home, and then start all over again the next week. Whew. And I was spending a lot more time on the road than I was at home. And oh, by the way, I wasn't sleeping really well. And oh, by the way, I wasn't eating worth a damn. And my blood pressure was horrible. My cholesterol was way up, and all of that kind of stuff. And I was a stroke waiting to happen. Right. And so I was in Jacksonville, Florida, in front of a class, and I had the stroke. And it was not fun. And so, there are a couple of things that I noticed, and I wanted to do better. I mean, I want to do everything better, but I want to do relationships better. I want to do my health better, but I get real cranky if I don't get 8 hours sleep a night now. And I watch what I'm eating, and I lost 110 pounds after the stroke. And, I've gained a little bit, lost a little bit over the years, but, it caused a reset. And, oh, by the way, it caused me to want to do my business better as well.
Yeah, you mentioned it maybe changed the way you think about leadership. How is that so?
Well, it caused me to think about my mortality. I mean, that's a big thing, and you realize, it's kind of like the scales lift from your eyes, and you can see things a little bit more clearly when you realize that. It caused me to write a book, and the book came out in March. It's called Every Dog Has Its Day, and to me that saying, and I've used it for years, but to me that saying means two things. One is that everybody's going to get their 15 minutes of fame, and what do you do with it when you get that 15 minutes of fame? And some people's 15 minutes last 15 years. And some people's just is it gone an eye blink. But the other thing is it's a great Latin phrase, which is called memento mori, which is remember your death. And so that's extremely humbling. See, because here's what happens a lot of times is, first of all, we believe that we have to be the smartest person in the room. Right. And that leads to hubris, because when we get into a situation, we've been running a company for 25, 30, 40 years. And, oh, by the way, we're getting older, and we may have lost a step, but we don't want to admit we lost a step. And and everything relies on us. That leads to a condition called hubris. And hubris is believe in your own BS.
Yeah.
And so that's what happens is you get into that situation where you feel like your kids can't do it better than you can, even though they probably can. And you're the only one that the business depends on. And I don't care whether your business is a $100 million business or a $500 million business or a $10 million business. It really doesn't matter. It's just you feel like you have to be at the hub of that. Well, one of the things that that the stroke taught me is, look, it can be all over like that. Yeah. And if I'm the only one that everything depends on, then that's not a real strong framework.
Yeah. I deal with a lot of founders, being one myself. I understand this concept. I want to ask this question, Chip. So, I think as a founder, well, we know when you start out an organization, I mean, there's a lot of sacrifice, personal sacrifice that goes into building an organization, right? Financial, time, you're emotional, there's just a lot of things that go into building an organization. And I've found that a successful one, right, that especially in the nonprofit world, that's my most experience as far as the success of a organization. I've started many other companies as well, but the most successful has been through my nonprofit. And nonprofits, as well as other for-profit companies, often start because of some emotional trauma or some dramatic, something or other happens in their life. And so they start this organization. They become very tied to it. Like I call it a stage of where the identity fuse with it, right? So the identity of the organization, the identity of the person become almost one, right? Because they're, and I think it needs to be that, because you're answering all the questions, you're taking all the problems, you're dealing with all the issues, you're the only one really strategizing it, because it's just a start out company. And so, but that obviously that'll carry on, and as your organization grows, those hats become, I think, a little heavier, because they become more important, right? And I think I can understand, or at least I can relate to a founder that may feel like, hey, this isn't going to grow unless I'm steering this ship, for a while. But you talk about something I totally agree with, and I just wanted to ask this. So, you've said, and I love the phrase, I'm going to read it so I got it right. Succession is emotional work disguised as strategic work. And as us founders and CEOs, as we grow our organization and as we begin to see our leadership evolve and our just evolve naturally, what do you mean when you say succession is more emotional than and it's disguised by strategic work?
Were you ever told by your parents, big boys don't cry?
Absolutely.
Okay. So let's start there, and let's start talking about the recognition of emotion. I do a lot of work in EQ and emotional quotient, and part of that is self-awareness. And self-awareness is the ability to understand your emotions as they're happening, understand what their effects will be, and understand what effects there will be on other people. So what I find is that, and Brene Brown talks about this an awful lot. I don't know if you're familiar with Brene Brown, but if you ever get a chance, she did a TED Talk in 2010, Brene Brown, and it was, her name is Brene Brown. She's a researcher. She's a storyteller. She's just really cool. And the TED Talk that she did is one of the top 5 TED Talks of all time. It's just been watched over and over again. But what she talks about is that most of us are emotionally illiterate. Mm-hmm. Most of us don't have the language to talk about emotion. And yet what we've learned in the last 25 or 30 years of research from the behavioral economists and from a number of the positive psychology people and that is that there isn't a thing that we do that isn't emotional. Because every decision we make is an emotional decision. Now, you may not agree with that, but every decision we make is an emotional one. However, most of us have spent a lifetime not acknowledging our emotions. So when we're feeling sad, or when we're feeling happy, or we're feeling whatever, we're taught to deny those emotions. And so when we get to the point where where a parent dies, we're taught to be strong instead of dissolving in a puddle of tears. And then when we get to the point where we may have lost a step, or even if we don't want to admit we lost a step, and then, hey, I think I'm still as good at my age as I was at 50. Maybe not in some things. My golf swing probably doesn't show it, but we don't have the words. We don't have the words for emotion to be able to understand what we're feeling. And see, it doesn't take a founder. There was a guy that I coached, and he was the head of a nonprofit, a rescue mission, and he had been there for 30 years, and he was getting ready to retire. Well, his whole identity was bound up in the rescue mission. He was a reverend. He preached on Sundays at all different churches. Everybody knew him. And for the last 5 years I coached him for about 10 years. For the last 5 years that I coached him, we were talking about how he's going to retire and his plan for retirement and what it looked like when he was retiring, and understanding what the emotions were that were going to retiring. So the big thing is doing the work up front and finding those words for emotion. And here's a great test sometime is write down every word that you can come up with for emotion in 60 seconds. The average I get, and there are 672 words in the English language for emotion. The average I get is 12. Because we can't think of those words for emotion. And whether they're sadness or disgust or contempt or joy or whatever they are, we just don't have the words for them. Well, what that tells you is if you don't have language to put around something, we're not paying as much attention to it, and that is the start of being able to figure in emotion as much as strategy.
I love that. In my experience, and I'd love your thoughts on this, Chip. I started an organization and it grew and grew and grew super fast, right? Super fast. I mean, one day I was a farm kid from Idaho. The next day I was literally on the cover of a Lay's potato chip bag. I'm talking to Good Morning America, I'm the CNN here, all these things that, almost virtually overnight, you're this person, right? So my identity with this organization I built not only became tighter, it was like solidified. I was it and it was me. Which is great. It was my passion. I had no problem with that. But as the business grew, and my leadership and position in this also evolved, like the business evolved. They didn't evolve in the same direction. Not that they separated, but and I understood. Success in a business means you're going to take off hats. You're going to bring more people on. Boards are going to tighten. Governance becomes more critical, and policies and all that become just more irrelevant. As a business evolves. But what I didn't and wasn't ready for, Chip, was the feelings and the emotions that I know myself I didn't enjoy, and I don't know if I'd say maybe you're right. Maybe I didn't have the words for them. I didn't understand him. And I called it my lack of emotional maturity, right? I'm learning the value of being vulnerable, the value of allowing myself to, hey, I like your term, I'm a boy and I can cry and that's just fine. That's hard. And I think some of our CEOs and founders, I don't know why we have this stigma where you have to be strong and stalwart and never wrong and
make decisions without emotion
and take
the emotion out of decision making,
which I don't know. It's never made sense to me because now I get you don't want to necessarily be reactionary. You don't want to. In my case, right? I remember. By the way, you had a stroke. I had a heart attack. 46 years old. Had a heart attack, and I know it was from stress and worry, and part of this what I call founder syndrome was really playing a toll on me. Here I am as an organization, a leader, the founder of this organization, the face of it, and all of a sudden I'm not invited to certain meetings, right? I'm not included in some of these decisions, which on paper and my goal was great. That's what I wanted. It was growing, right? It was exactly what I wanted to happen. But no one coached me, Chip. No one taught the emotional reaction and feelings that come when your business starts to outgrow you, right? Mm-hmm. And as I did more research and trying to find out, I saw therapists. I was, taking depression medicine. I was, trying to find every way because I know it wasn't me. Here I am. My one of my best friends is the executive director, and he's getting interviews and stuff. The things that I used to do, right? And it honestly was not a jealous thing. I was happy for him. In fact, in some ways, I was kind of tired of taking all the interviews. But there was something that just felt like a stab. It just felt like what I call a relevance wound. I started feeling irrelevant. And and then you start thinking everybody else feels that way about you, which isn't true. How do you teach or how do you coach someone that's starting down that path that may start feeling those emotions? Have you experienced people that have done that?
Yeah, I have. And it's important to get out in front of it. So, a lot of my coaching engagements have been multiple year, like 10 years or more. And so I'm dealing with people in all kinds of phases. It's not usually somebody that comes to me in the last couple of years of their career that wants to be coached. It's usually somebody that's mid-career or maybe even a little bit more advanced. But over the course of time, then when you've got that trusted relationship that's working, you can have those conversations because you ease into them.
Mm.
And I don't care whether it's somebody that is early career. So I've got some hypos that I work with that are in their 30s, and the question I ask them is, and it's the same question I ask somebody who's later career, but the question I ask them is, okay, you've got 30 years to work. What does that look like when you get to the end? And again, it doesn't matter whether you have 30 or 20 or 10. It's I want you to think about, I don't want you to haphazardly stumble into this. Where do you want to be?
Yeah.
What do you want your life to look like?
Yeah.
And what I found is that people usually don't know what they want. They know what they don't want, but they can't tell you what they want. And so it's so helpful to be able to have that vision of what does it look like. What does it look like when you're 50? What does it look like when you're 60? What does it look like when you're 70?
Yeah.
And we talked about retirement, and I think there is retirement is a fairly modern invention. Because people worked until they died for forever. I mean, that was what it was. And maybe it was because we died a lot earlier, but still, a good friend of mine told me that he was reading something and it was talking about retirement. And there were 3 phases of retirement. The first phase was vacation, when you're running around the house going, yeah, I'm free. And then the next 3 years is depression.
Yeah.
And then the next phase is meaning and purpose. So okay, so how do you find meaning and purpose beyond having to run the stuff that you've been running for so many years that can take you to the next phase? So that really becomes the diverging point. Is okay, if I can figure out what meaning and purpose look like to me beyond the thing that I'm running or the thing that I've created.
Right. Interesting. It's strategy, right? I think, and you're so right. I kind of look back at my own example or my own experience. I started sleeping on the peace. I didn't think about the end. I didn't think about legacy. Or I was never going to stop working because it was my passion. I'll always be involved. I'll always, and as a founder, you will in a lot of ways. You'll never escape that you're the founder of it. But I never planned or strategized or even considered, well, what does it look like when I'm 65? It was always, I'll deal with that when I get there. Yeah. Almost, and I think there's levels, stages, I call them, obviously stages, as a founder begins to recognize that this thing is getting a little bit beyond you, and oftentimes I know I felt like I was losing control of this organization. And I know control is, it's the hardest, one of the hardest things, if not the hardest thing in my experience for founders to release. What have you learned about building trust, let's say in the succession, building trust in the next, maybe not necessarily the next founder of the organization, but the next leaders that are going to run that organization for the founder?
I don't know. It's about building trust or it's about having trust. And trust is such a funny thing, isn't it? It's so hard to build and so easy to give away. But that's a great question. I think to build trust, you first have to give trust. And so I do a bunch of 360s in my work. I do 15 or 20 360s a year, and a 360 is an instrument where you get feedback from people all around, whoever the subject is. And I would say that 80% of the 360s that I do have delegation as one of the primary areas for development. Well, okay, so what's delegation? What are the important parts of delegation? Well, the biggest part of delegation is trust.
Sure.
If I trust you to do what you say you're going to do, then I'm going to be able to delegate. I'm going to be able to give away things freely.
Sure. Yeah.
So look, you mentioned the book Handoffs that's coming out in October, and I'm really excited about that. But it's about an 82-year-old guy that is somebody who runs a business or has founded a business. He runs the business. His father had founded. And he'd been running it for many, many years, and he ran it with an iron fist, and he didn't trust anybody. And the business was hammer-locked. It wasn't growing. It wasn't doing the things it needed to do. And he had a 54-year-old son that he didn't trust to run the business, and he didn't trust anybody. What happens is he has a stroke. Gee, I'm surprised that I wrote about somebody with a stroke, but he has a stroke, and the business has a crisis, and all of a sudden he can't be there, and it's the process of then building the trust and building the strategic chops in the company when his son takes over and that kind of stuff, and I see it all the time. In order to be able to give, in order to be able to trust someone, you've got to give trust. You've got to be trustworthy.
I like that. Well, it makes me think when you're coaching founders, Chip, I mean, how much attention do you or should you maybe give in preparing founders to let go? Is that something you coach from the very beginning? I'll share one thought. I share this quite a bit. I was talking to another coach that mentioned, and I'd never heard this before. You probably have. I hadn't. But she said the best advice she ever got was when she started out her organization, a friend of hers said, listen, you need to realize your organization's not going to love you as much as you love it. Which is true, and I think the premise around that is to help that founder understand that if you want this to grow, you better start right now on understanding and preparing how this is going to grow beyond you.
I'll give you an example. I work with a company right now. The CEO is getting ready to retire, and it was a 3-year process to pick his successor. Wow. Not only was it a 3-year process, but then it was a 3-year process afterwards to fully give the reins over. Sure. They are ready to go through that process again. I don't know when it's going to be, the next 3 to 5 years, sometime around there, where the current CEO is going to retire at some point. It's the same thing. They were 2 years out ahead of it, 3 years out ahead of it, maybe 4 or 5 years out ahead of it, and there is time then for the new person to learn the ropes and take over. It takes an enormous amount of self-restraint. It takes an emotion. It takes an enormous amount of emotional intelligence.
Maturity
to be able to do that well. So I don't think I think it's 5 years at least, Wow. And again, there's a lot of those founders that just, first of all, they've never heard of coaching, or if they heard of coaching, they think, oh God, I don't need a coach. And I don't care if it's me. I think there's a lot of really well-trained coaches and experienced coaches that can help. Yeah. But you just got to be willing to. You got to wanna.
Let's talk about this. Is it a pride thing? Is it I don't want to show weakness? What is it about that? I know for me, if I'm being completely honest, when I first heard about coaching, which isn't too long ago, by the way, it was, I didn't need it. What does someone else going to teach me that I don't already know, which is extremely immature, by the way.
Yeah. Listen, I've been coaching for 27 years, and 27 years ago, nobody knew what a coach was. Nobody.
Yeah, sure.
And really, it's become mainstream in the last 10 years, maybe. So yeah, and again, I've got my best friend, I've got my wife to talk to, I've got my board to talk to. But see, the thing about a coach is that a coach is there to not be your best friend, not be your wife, not be your board of directors. A coach is there. The sole focus of the coach is you. Mm-hmm. The coach doesn't have skin in the game. The coach isn't going to get hurt if you say, I don't agree with you. Well, and bottom line is, I don't give advice. Well, I rarely give advice, maybe a few times, but I don't give advice. I just ask really good questions, and that's the highest and best use of a coach, is to ask really good questions and to help you figure out what's the best way to handle things, because you have skin in the game. I don't.
Yeah. Be a good listener, probably. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, that took me a while to learn.
Hey, you know what? I tell you what. My wife she's taught me. I'm a public speaker. I'm an outside salesman. I think, like yourself, we like to talk. We don't like dead sound. We don't, we don't like a stalled conversation. Right? Someone's always got to be saying something.
Right.
And I've learned the value of silence, and I've learned the value of listening, like focusing, not waiting for the next question, not anticipating the next thing I want to say, but actually listening to what the person's saying. And I think that takes some practice. And I know my wife is very good at it, but I think you're right. The coaches that I like to talk to are the ones that are actually listening to me.
Yeah, and that's it. Your wife, if your wife says to you, if you bring that up one more time, I'm going to scream. That's probably, but your coach won't do that.
Right.
Your coach is probably going to say to you, okay, so what is it about this that you keep talking about? Is there a reason that you keep bringing this up?
We've talked about founders and their transitioning from, running a business to maybe, offloading it to other people, which ultimately is building their legacy, right? Working now towards legacy. Has your definition of legacy changed since you've started coaching, or even since you've, your own founder transition?
Yeah, you used a great word, and that's relevance. And I think legacy is bound up in relevance. It's look, not all of us are going to have shining cities on the hill that we can point to and said, that's our legacy. So it's being relevant enough that maybe your kids make a different decision because they knew you. Maybe, I would never want to get into the phase where people are wearing rubber bands that say WWCD. What would Chip do? Yeah. But maybe you have a different decision that's made in a business, and I'll never know about that. But that's my legacy. And I don't think it's a picture on the wall. I don't think it's, remembering grandpa because I go into a lot of businesses that are third, fourth, and even some fifth generation businesses that have those pictures of the founders on the wall, or they have the Hall of Shame or the living history wall or that kind of stuff. And I think that's pretty cool. But bottom line is, was I relevant enough to make an impact that is going to change the way you think about something? It reminds me of when I was a kid. A friend of mine were in a department store, and we got this weird idea to set all the alarm clocks for like 2 hours later than we were going to leave. And so there were 50 alarm clocks in this end of the department store, and we set them all for like 3 o'clock in the afternoon. We weren't around to see it. We didn't stand there and watch these alarm clocks go off. We just imagined what was going to go off, and maybe that happened and it drove people crazy, or maybe it didn't. But that's the whole thing with legacy. I'm not going to be around to see it.
As a founder, and I can only imagine other founders feel the same way. Legacy when it pertains to their organization, we were so identity fused with it, and still a lot of our identity is still fused with that. Legacy becomes tied to our organization. And I'll speak for myself here that I really, really value the credibility, the ethics, the overall culture of this organization I started, because it's me. I feel like it's something at least my identity was and still related to or tied to. And so if someone ever thought bad about Sleep Family Peace, I feel like that's a reflection of me, and vice versa. So I think legacy, when it comes to founders and CEOs that have started something, I can't help but feel like that's some worry. That's some worry that I know I have in making sure that the organization is ran properly. It's built on culture that's going to last. It's got leadership in there that's going to last. I love the discussion about relevance, and I think that's important because that's the stabs that I believe founder syndrome causes. It's the hurt that a founder feels, is the relevance wounds. Am I relevant anymore to my own identity? And if you were, let me ask you, and this has been awesome, Chip. Thank you for your time. This is a great interview, and I think there's a lot of gold nuggets that founders and CEOs and business leaders are going to learn. And in a minute, I'm going to ask how people get a hold of you. But I do want to ask this question: advices to founders. It's kind of the last question I like to share. But if you were speaking to a founder or founders right now, in any capacity, I guess, any stage of their build, and they're maybe afraid of becoming irrelevant, especially after stepping back, what would you want them to know? What's the one thing that you would want them to know if they're starting to feel this irrelevance?
It's going to sound weird, but memento mori. You're not going to be there someday. And I don't mean remember your death. Maybe it's a professional death. Maybe it's but memento mori is like, look, have some humility and realize you've built this really cool thing, and you want it to grow and nurture and be as vital as you can. I founded speaking of nonprofits, I founded the South Bay Police and Fire Memorial Foundation with 4 other people, or 3 other people. At some days you just gotta let it go. You just gotta walk away. You just gotta say, hey, it's somebody else's turn to take it to the next level.
Wow. Chip, you're amazing. Anything, number one, how can our audience get a hold of you? If they're looking for some help, looking for some coaching advice, how do they get a hold of you?
Yeah, my website is scholzassociates.com. I'm working on a new website, chipscholz.com, but that probably won't be ready for a couple months. But you can get a hold of my books at Amazon, or get a hold of me at chip@scholzassociates.com. My books are also on audiobooks and are on a number of different platforms as well.
Listen, everybody, we all know that emotion plays a big role in humanity, in our lives, and certainly in our decision processes. And if you're like me, and the reasons why I even started this podcast is, if you're struggling through some of these emotional feelings and environments and reactions to things that are happening as you're planning your succession, Chip is one of those coaches that I think really hits on areas that a lot of people don't, and that's dealing with these emotions that that you have, that you're dealing with. Get a hold of him. He's got a line on something that I think a lot of people are missing. And Chip, you're awesome. What you're doing is honestly,
Thank you very much.
You're hitting an area that I think isn't addressed a lot. And us founders, we're I mean this in the best way. We're arrogant, cocky, tough guys that and we need to be.
And God bless you for that, right?
We need to be. And for whatever reason, that doesn't necessarily have to equate the fact that we don't have to recognize we have emotion and recognize that we're affected by that. So thank you for helping those out, and thank you for helping the ones that will contact you, because as a founder that's been through founder syndrome, that still and will always suffer from relevance wounds, it's good to know that we have people like you that can coach and help us work through those emotions that we're too scared to address. So thanks for being on the show.
Thank you very much, Luke. I really enjoyed it, and thanks for the conversation.
Absolutely. Thank you for joining me on the Leadership Evolution podcast. If something in today's conversation challenged you, stretched you, or made you think a little differently, that's the point. Growth always starts with awareness. And if you are struggling in your journey, if you feel like you are fading away from what you have built, visit my website, lukemickelson.com, and learn how you can take back your confidence and create lasting legacy. If you found value in this episode, please share it with another leader who may be in the middle of their own evolution. And remember, your role as a leader isn't just to build something successful. It's to build something that lasts. Build what outlives you.